Good evening, everyone. Hi, my name is Melvette Hill. I'm the Communications Specialist with the National Parent Leadership Institute, and we welcome you to our webinar tonight, What Parents Should Know, the Impact of Racial Disparities Related to Suspensions and Expulsions of Students of Color. Tonight, the webinar is being led by Dr. Rosemarie Allen. She's a Family Leadership Training Institute facilitator and president and CEO for the Institute for Racial Equity and Excellence, also known as IREE. And we're doing this webinar in conjunction with NPLI. I would also like to bring greetings from our co-directors at NPLI, Patty Kakison and Donna Thompson-Bennett, and also on the webinar tonight, watching from the comfort of her own home, is one of our board of directors, Wendy Howler. So we can go to the next slide. We want to let you know a little bit about NPLI. We're going to also ask everyone to mute your line so that we don't have any background noise. We would like to record this for those who aren't able to attend. And right now I'm hearing a lot of background noise.
And
thank you so much. So the mission of NPLI is this. The National Parent Leadership Institute exists to coordinate and increase the civic skills and impact of diverse parents to improve child and community outcomes as they build caring communities. And what do we believe? Well, NPLI believes that families, communities, and our democracy are strengthened when all parents have the leadership skills to maximize child outcomes at home, in their neighborhood, and in public policy. And now I present to you Dr. Rosemarie Allen. She'll get us kicked off.
Thank you so much.
Okay, and I'm sorry, Dr. Allen. Before we continue, I just want to remind everyone to mute your lines, and also you can put questions in the chat box, and we'll try to answer some of those as we go along. Thank you, Dr. Allen.
Thank you. I believe someone just Okay, and I'm hoping everyone can hear me okay. We're going to be talking about early childhood suspensions, well, actually suspensions in all grades, and how it relates to children and families of color. But before we get started, what I'd like to do is kind of define suspensions. We do not have a federal definition of what a suspension is, but this was one of the best definitions that I was able to find. And it says that a suspension is a disciplinary action that is administered as a consequence of a student's inappropriate behavior. And it requires that that student is absent from the classroom or from the school for a specified period of time. And one of the things that I want to point out is that while typically when people think of suspensions, they think of a child being asked to leave the school or the classroom for a period of time. But what I want you to know, especially as parents, is that the schools now know that we are watching suspensions, and all of our data that exists right now, it comes from self-reporting. So teachers and schools are telling us how many children are being suspended. And we know that the numbers that we see are very, very conservative, because a lot of the suspensions that are going on, they're not captured. For instance, I like to define suspensions as excluding a child from the learning process for a few days. And that can include excluding the children from the classroom, excluding them from the school. And it also means when you send a child home early, or if the child is asked to leave the program because they're not a good fit. So we see children being sent home early, children being put on a modified schedule, parents being told that if they take their child out, that then they can avoid a suspension being on their record. But all of these are forms of suspensions in terms of what I'm discussing tonight. So I want to back up a little bit and talk about this project, the Perry Preschool Project, and it took place in Ypsilanti, Michigan. And this was one of the very first longitudinal studies that we ever had that proved the importance of high-quality early childhood. And most people who are writing grants are trying to help people understand the cost benefit that's that high-quality early childhood brings, they cite the study, the Perry Preschool study. But what most people don't know is that this study was conducted on a 100% African-American population. And there are two other studies that are highlighted when people talk about what a difference a high-quality early childhood program makes. And that's the Abecedarian project that was conducted on 97% African-American population, and the Chicago child-parent study that also had a very, very high percentage, 93% of that population was African-American. So why do I bring this up? And it'll become clear to you as we move on. But here we are. We use the data that was provided by these African-American families that proved the amazing impact of a high-quality early childhood environment. But at the same time, we're pushing Black children out the door through suspensions and expulsions. So let's take a look back on some of the history around early childhood suspensions, or should I say suspensions in general, because there really hasn't been a lot of studies on early childhood suspensions. But the very first suspension study occurred in 1975, and it was conducted by the Children's Defense Fund. And we found that in the years following the Brown versus Board of Education decision, that the suspension rates for Black students tripled compared to those of white students. And I see that Tina has asked what our definition of a high-quality education is. And Tina, there are a lot of factors that go into that. There's teacher quality, programmatic quality, there's environmental qualities that we take into consideration. But when you dig into these studies, they talk about it. And a topic for another webinar is how many children of color do not have access to those programs that are even considered high quality. So anyway, looking back on the suspension rates, we found that they were triple. In the year following Brown versus Board of Education's order to desegregate schools, there were 22 per 100 white students who were suspended compared to 76 per 100 Black students who were suspended. Studies spanning 40 years show that Black children are up to 4 times more likely to be suspended than their white counterparts. So while there's been extensive data, extensive research on kindergarten through 12th grade suspensions, we've had very few studies that really looked at the disciplinary practices of children younger than 5 years of age in early childhood programs. And here I see that Julie has a question. I'm going to take questions throughout the presentation on the important role that a parent or committee can play in addressing these disparities. And Julie, we're going to get into that as well. I'll keep going, and I believe I'll answer your question as we move along. So, the civil rights data collection in 2014 that was released in 2014 for the very first time included data on preschoolers. And it included the number of preschool children who had been suspended at least once, who had more than one suspension, and who was expelled or received corporal punishment. And what it showed was that there were 5,000 preschoolers who were suspended at least once, and another 2,500 who were suspended a second time. What I want to make very clear to you is that this is not all of the early childhood environment. This is just a very small slice of the pie, because these data were collected on just state-funded preschool, not child care, not Head Start, not school district type preschools, but just the state-funded preschools. And they further found that African-American children are only 18% of the preschool population, but they comprised almost half of all preschool suspensions. And 79% of the preschool population were boys, but they were 82% of all suspensions. So we see that there are disparities in race and in gender. And children with disabilities were also disproportionately suspended. My friend Walter Gilliam, he said there are 4 risk factors for being suspended. Being big, the larger the child is, the taller that the child is, being big, being Black, and being a boy. And the data proves that out. We got a new data collection that was released in 2016, and it showed the same patterns of racial and gender disproportionality. Boys during this time period were a little more than half of the preschool population, but 78% of those that were suspended. And we're going to talk about some of the primary reasons for this. African American preschoolers were almost 4 times more likely to be suspended than their white counterparts. And Tasha, you asked the question about what behaviors. What I want to interject here is that studies show that the behaviors of these children are exactly the same in many instances, but it's the children of color who are most often suspended, even when engaging in the same behaviors. What was troubling to me during this latest release of data was what's happening to our little girls. And what we're finding, what was found actually, was that African American girls were only 20% of the female population of preschoolers, but more than half of those that were suspended. So when we look at this, we also know that English language learners were not disproportionately suspended from preschool, but definitely when they started in kindergarten. So we also know that children are being suspended younger and younger. There was a survey that was conducted in Illinois that showed 40% of the state's child care program suspended infants and toddlers. So these are babies who are still in a crib. These are babies who are not walking, who are not talking, who are still in diapers, being suspended from their early childhood programs. And in North Dakota, 20% of early childhood programs expelled children, but of those that were expelled, 53% were infants and toddlers. There were more toddlers suspended than preschool children suspended. And this is alarming for us, that we're suspending children before they even learn appropriate behaviors. In 2005, Yale University, they conducted a study that showed that preschoolers were suspended 3 times more than kindergartners through 12th grades combined. So we suspend young children, and we suspend them a lot. In Michigan, the state's rate for suspensions was 34 times. The state's rate for preschool suspensions were 34 times that of kindergarten through 12th grade. So it's these young children at the most critical stage for brain development that's being kicked out of schools and suspended much more than kindergarten through 12th grade. So the other thing that I want you to know, especially those of you who are parents, is that this type of disproportionality, these disparities, they happen throughout the education system, not just in suspensions. We see disproportionality in classroom discipline, the child whose name is being called all the time, and referrals to the director's office or to the principal's office. We see disparities in which children are being sent home early. We see it in sending children to another classroom. And you can go to schools throughout this country and see black and brown children who are sitting in hallways because they've been asked to leave their classrooms. And as we look at these data, and it's alarming, and we should all be concerned about it, we have to ask ourselves why this is happening. Why are we suspending young children? And why are we disproportionately suspending black and brown children, children of color? And one of the reasons that I'm so passionate about this is because I was one of those children. Some of you may have seen my TED Talk on this, and I talk about how I was suspended from the time I entered kindergarten. I was suspended for things that I just did not understand because I knew inherently that I wasn't a bad child. And I couldn't understand at first why I was being suspended so much. But after a while, I began to learn that school was not a safe space for me, that I wasn't going to be given the benefit of the doubt. And I had teachers who didn't understand what I was going through. And Julie says here that the school to prison pipeline starts early. Julie, that's profound that you say that, because we keep saying the school to prison pipeline, but many years ago, Marian Wright Edelman, the head of the Children's Defense Fund, she called it the cradle to prison pipeline. So now we know that children are suspended from preschool. And when I say preschool, I'm talking about infants and toddlers all the way through. And there are studies that show the long-term impact of toddlers being suspended, because children who are suspended are 10 times more likely to enter the juvenile justice system. They're more likely to have low achievement, to drop out of school, and one of the key factors, risk factors for being suspended, is having been suspended before. So like me, these children are suspended over and over and over again. So why does this happen? One of the critical reasons is that teachers do not feel that they have the tools they need to address challenging behaviors in the classroom. So states are doing a lot right now to help teachers develop the tools they need in order to address these issues. But what I am challenging is, when we talk about challenging behaviors, my question is always, who's being challenged? Is it the teacher whose behavior is challenging, or is it the child's behavior that's challenging? Let's take a look. So a lot of teachers say, if you take suspensions away, you're taking a tool out of my toolbox. You've heard this saying, if all you have is a hammer, then everything you see looks like a nail. And we have to ask ourselves, suspension's a tool, or is it a weapon? Is it a weapon that is being used primarily against children of color? And we have to understand that not only are suspensions a weapon, but they are proven not to work. Suspensions do not change children's behavior. When you send a child home for misbehavior, that child is at home, and it's not like there's some magic fairy coming and teaching the skills this child needs. It's just delaying time for the child to come back, and they're no better prepared when they come back than they were when they left, except they may be more resentful, and they may not trust the teachers, and a lot of other things may be going on, because in cases like mine, the child didn't understand why they were suspended in the first place. But one of the other biggest and most critical factors is the role of implicit bias. So we're going to talk about implicit bias and what that looks like. But I'd rather show you in a visual. Some of you may have seen this visual called the ladder of inference. And what the ladder does is shows you how quickly we make assumptions. And like any ladder, you start right here at the bottom where you select data, and then you add meaning, cultural and personal, based on your cultural and personal perspectives. And then you make assumptions based on the meanings that you added. And then you draw conclusions, you adopt beliefs about the world, and then you take actions based on those beliefs. So let me show you what this looks like. It takes milliseconds to process this information. We have no idea we're doing it. In reality, every single person you meet, you size up. You go through this. It's just our way of determining meaning that's happening all around us. And it makes our thinking invisible. So let's try this out. First, I select data. Rosemarie rushed right past me without speaking. I want to interject here that speaking is cultural. We rarely think about it as cultural, but it is. Some of you were intentionally taught to speak when you walk into a room. And some of you were taught that if you walk into a room and people are engaged in conversation, it's rude to interrupt. In my family, when I walked in my grandma's house and my aunties were there, not only did I have to walk in and speak to everyone by name, but I also had to give everybody a hug. Hi, Auntie Trina. Hi, Auntie Nett. Hi, Auntie Pam. If I wanted to get in trouble, I could walk in and go, hey, And I could hear my grandmother now. She'd call me right back in that room, admonish me, and made sure I spoke to my aunties and hugged them. So I select data. Rosemarie walked right past me without speaking. And then I add meaning based on my own personal and cultural references. Rosemarie has an attitude. She doesn't like me. I knew it. And then I make assumptions. She thinks she's better than us. And then I draw conclusions. And then I take action based on what I believe to be true. We'll never be treated fairly by her because she doesn't like us. Let's try another example. I select data. I noticed that child did not use Miss Allen to address me. That little 3-year-old had the nerve to call me Rosemarie. And again, titles are cultural. In my family, anyone taller than you, just about, had a title. Uncle, auntie, Mr., Miss, pastor, first lady, cousin, whatever it is, you gave that respect to older people, so everyone had a title. So that child did not call me Miss Allen. So now I'm going to add meanings and labels based again on my own personal and cultural experience. I think that's disrespectful. And then I make assumptions. That family didn't teach that child any manners. That child is rude, and the family didn't teach him anything. And then, where's my button? And then I draw conclusions. I make less of an effort to get to know that child as a person because I think they're rude, and their family didn't teach them any manners. And this is how quickly we engage in implicit bias and how fast we can go up that ladder. So research tells us that implicit racial bias is one of the most critical factors that promote racial and ethnic inequality in our society today. And it's really important that we understand the causes of this bias and then do the intentional work that's required to bring it to our conscious level. Because once we are aware of our biases, then we can do the work that's necessary to reduce our biases. One of the things I tell my students all the time is that aware is halfway there. But I have to tell you, it's only halfway, but it's a good half. It's better than not being aware of it. Because implicit bias is this mental process, and it results in feelings and attitudes about people based on race, age, appearance, or anything that we think is different. It's unconscious, and we're not aware of the negative racial biases that we have about people that develop over the course of our lifetimes. I want you to think of your inner recording, that deep inside you, everything you hear is recorded. And over the course of our lifetimes, we hear a lot of biases. We can't help it. Every one of us are exposed to these biases because we live in a biased society. We drink biased water. We breathe biased air. It's not our fault. We didn't ask for this, but we all have it, and we've been exposed to it. Even today, what are some of the biases that you're hearing? That all Mexicans are here illegal, that black people are all gang members, that young people are out of control, that millennials don't like to work, that old people can't hear. There are biases that are recorded over and over and over again, and we do not know they're there. And what we're finding is that people are committed. They can be very committed to being good people, committed to egalitarianism. And they are doing deliberate work to act and to operate and to behave without bias. But these biases are still there, and they're hidden, and they're based on stereotypes. And even when we believe that we treat people as equals, our biases still influence our perceptions and actions in ways that we are not at all aware of. But once we become aware of them, and own them. And the key here is to own them. Then we have the power to change our minds. And what we're doing in teacher education programs across this country is helping our students who are becoming teachers become aware of their biases. I teach in the teacher education department here at Metropolitan State University of Denver. And one of my classes is cultural socialization of young children, and the other is teaching for social justice. And one of the things we do in my class, one of them is an 8-week intensive weekend. So every weekend we're going somewhere, and I take them to places they've never been or never thought of going. I take them to the roughest, the so-called roughest neighborhoods in Denver so that they can be aware of the biases when they pop up. I take them to the Muslim Denver Islamic Society. I take them to the Buddhist temple, to a black church, to a Jewish museum, and they're there and they're interacting with the people who attend those places, and they're getting to know them, and they're being exposed. But more than anything, they're being exposed to their own biases, because one of the things they have to do in their journal is to write about what they expected to see, and then how their expectations were either reinforced or they recognized that they had biases attached to that. So we have to become aware of our biases, and we have to own them so that we can begin to work on them. So we're talking about biases, and we're talking about preschool classrooms. How does implicit bias impact classrooms? About 1.5 years ago, Walter Gilliam found that preschool teachers judge children's behaviors based on their race. So, preschool teachers at a huge early childhood conference were asked to watch a video clip of 4 children to anticipate challenging behaviors. Those children included a black girl and a black boy, a white girl and a white boy. All of these children were child actors, but the participants did not know that. So before they got started, the researchers gave these directions. They said, we're interested in learning about how teachers detect challenging behaviors in the classroom. Sometimes this involves seeing a behavior before it becomes problematic. The video segments you're about to view are of preschoolers engaging in various activities. Some clips may or may not contain challenging behaviors. Your job is to press the enter key on the external keypad every time you see a behavior that could become a potential challenge. What the participants did not know, again, was that all of the children in the videos were child actors. There were no behaviors at all in the videos. But even more, the participants didn't know that eye-tracking devices were being used so that the researchers could follow who the participants were watching. And the results showed that, not surprisingly, the black boy was watched more than any other child. And 42% of the teachers reported that he required more of their attention, even though there were no behaviors. They reported that he required more of their attention than any other children. The black girl was watched more often than the white children, and white children were watched less than both black children. And the results were true with both black teachers and white teachers. And I bring this up because every now and then I'm challenged. Well, black teachers suspend black children too. Yes, they do. Black cops shoot black men too. Yes, they do. And what did I say earlier? We are all impacted by implicit bias. None of us get away unscathed. We're all impacted by this. And it's really, really important that we know this and that we recognize this, because it impacts how we interact with people. So I'd like to show you a couple of pictures. This is my little guy. His name is Clarence Allen III. And this little guy was my 9th pregnancy. and I only have 2 children. So we lost 7 babies to get to this point. He is the hope, dreams, aspiration, and prayers for generations. This is him when he was about 9 months old. And here he is at his first Halloween as Winnie the Pooh. And here he is about 11 months old. And if you look at this picture very carefully, you'll see that he's holding a red Lego. Clarence had to take this Lego with him everywhere he went. To sleep, to eat, to play, no matter what he was doing, he had to hold on to that Lego. Fortunately for him and for me, I was the director of his child care program, and I handpicked his teachers. But I share this with you because this little precious guy, who was the answered prayers for generations, was at high risk for being one of those statistics. One is that he was very tall for his age, he's black, and he's a boy. And I could just imagine if his teachers didn't know him well, and if one of them took that Lego. Because, sometimes as teachers we say ridiculous stuff. Like, oh, you can't bring a toy to the lunch table. And they'll take it. And had they taken it, I could see him falling out and having an extreme meltdown. And I could even imagine them calling me to come pick him up. And I've already said calling parents to pick their child up is a form of suspension. So he's at high risk for suspensions. And here he is at 2.5. And he dropped the Lego by this point, and he picked up the hat. And he had to wear that Mickey Mouse hat everywhere he went. To sleep, to eat, to church, everywhere. But again, what if his teachers didn't understand? By this point, we began to have some concerns that he had some special needs. Shortly after this, he was diagnosed with sensory integration processing disorder and had to have some services as a result. But again, high risk for suspensions. And this is him now. This is this child who was classified as special needs, who was high risk for suspensions, who just graduated from Howard University with a 3.6 grade point average and is now applying to law schools. And I share this with you because just like you on the phone, I don't love my children any more than any of you. But when we begin to throw people's children out of school, they have no idea of the profound love that we have for our kids, how hard it was for us to bring him into the world. And for him to become a statistic through suspensions is heartbreaking. And here we are, right here. And I have a daughter as well. She goes, Mom, you talk about him all the time. What about me? And I do have a daughter, but I just share this because as parents, I want you to make sure that every single teacher that touches your child's life, know them. Know what it took to get them here. To know the hopes, dreams, and aspirations that you have for your children. Because studies have shown, and Walter Gilliam says this quite often, that he has never, ever seen a suspension occur when the parent and teacher knew and liked each other. So that says a lot. So when we talk about what can you do to prevent suspensions and expulsions, one is to make sure that you know your child's teacher and they know you. So let's take a look here. What are our personal and cultural beliefs that shape our attitudes about challenging behaviors? As moms, as teachers, we all have hot buttons. And our hot buttons are those buttons that are pushed that make us crazy. And for every person, their hot buttons are different. In my family, my hot button is my daughter's smart mouth. So she's 34 years old now. But when she was a teenager, that little girl had to have the last word for everything. She's so brilliant and she's so smart. But that arguing with me with my hot button, it would drive me crazy. But it didn't drive my husband crazy. It didn't bother him at all. But what bothered him, his hot button, was when she slammed doors. That didn't bother me, because for me that meant she was on the other side of the door, and I didn't have to hear her mouth. So we have to know what our hot buttons are. We have to know what they are as parents, but we're training our teachers to know what their hot buttons are too. And when we talk about hot buttons, we have to look at our hot buttons through a racial equity lens. Where might there be cultural disconnects that might impact those hot buttons? And cultural disconnects happen all the time. And they happen because most children, these children come to school and they don't know what teachers expect of them. Do you know that as teachers we have a language that no one else has? A child comes to preschool or kindergarten and we say sit crisscross applesauce. Most people never hear that term except in an early childhood classroom. That there are things that happen in school that children may not be aware of. And even when they get into high school or middle school, the rules of school can be so different and disconnected from the rules of home and rules of the community that cultural disconnects occur. And most teachers are not aware of the cultural expectations of the child at home either. And then we have to look at the fact that for young children, this could be the child's first experience outside of the home and family. And for older children, we have to understand that every school operates differently. My husband his family was in the military, and he talks about how difficult it was to change schools so often and to learn the culture of the school. And there may be extreme differences in the family's expectations of their children versus the teacher's expectations of the child's behavior. In my family, we were encouraged to challenge, to ask questions, to do research and argue our point, which is probably where my daughter got it from. And at school, that was not okay. The teachers that I had did not want you to question them at all. So cultural disconnects lead to disproportionate disciplinary practices. Let's take a look at
girl.
that.
And then I told him, is you crazy? Girl, he tripping right. Crazy. And can you believe he tried to ask me to get up first to get your breakfast? Girl, he crazy. And girl, guess what? I found some SeaWorld tickets for free for military, girl. We don't have to go. Yeah, we don't have to go. Yeah, girl, they got water, they got animals. Girl, yes. I'm excited, girl. Yes, he did, girl.
Then what happened?
Girl, I fell out. Couldn't believe it.
What?
Girl, I'm trying to tell you.
I'm trying to tell you.
Ain't he crazy?
It's crazy.
Girl.
Girl. Yeah,
Huh? Girl.
Girl.
Can you believe it?
No.
Me either, girl.
Something.
Girl, tell me about it.
That is flavor.
Huh?
That is something.
You tripping, girl.
It's tripping, girl.
I love this video clip. I love the interaction between mother and daughter, the whole thing about the hair. But as I watch this and I smile and it warms my heart, in the back of my mind, I'm afraid for this child. This little girl is not quite 2 years old, and her vocabulary is incredible. I mean, her language is amazing. She's very bright, probably highly gifted. But I have to ask teachers all the time, and I show this clip a lot. And my question is, are we ready for her? Because my fear for her is that she'll be at high risk for suspensions. Remember I told you that preschool girls were only 20% of the preschool population, but 54% of those children who are suspended? My fear is that she'll be labeled feisty, talkative, rude. Because I can hear her saying, "Teacher, you're tripping." And that's part of that cultural disconnect, where the expectations at home are different from the expectations at school. Different is not deficit. And we have to help teachers understand our own cultures. And we have to talk about what is culture. And culture is the way we live. Because people of the same race and ethnicity, they may live differently. I'm a Christian. I'm not pushing that on anyone. I'm just stating it as a fact. And when I was growing up, I was taught to be evenly yoked. That meant to marry another Christian. And my husband is also Christian, but I grew up in a Pentecostal Holy Roller church. And my husband grew up in an Episcopalian church. The cultures of those churches were very different. His Episcopalian church was 1 hour, which was a great shocker for me, and very quiet. At my church, we could go 3 hours. We could shout, "Hallelujah, thank you, Jesus," in the middle of a sermon. We can jump up and clap and dance whenever we got ready. So while we were both Christians, the culture of the churches were quite different. So culture is the way we live. It's our values, mores, and customs. It's the behavioral expectations we have of one another, our belief systems, our communication styles, the traditions that are passed and shared between generations. And culture impacts the way that our children learn. It impacts the way they cope. It impacts the way they solve problems and the way they even communicate. And if we can help teachers view our children through their cultural context, then they'll have a better understanding of the behavior of the child and the factors that influence their behavior. If that little girl's mother can come in and say, "This is what we do at home, and this is what we talk, and this is how we talk," and if she's saying, "Girl, you're tripping," that's not a bad thing. It's just the way we speak. It just means that I may not agree with you. And in our family, that's perfectly okay. Because when we send our children to school, we have to understand that there is a culture, a school culture, that exists. And this culture was created on white, middle-class, male standards. That is the culture of our school, white, middle-class males. And then there's a culture that we bring with us. Not only us, we bring it as families, and teachers bring it from their home. And then there's a culture that is created. If we all work together, we can create a culture where all children can thrive. I see a question here from my friend Tawana. She said, "Understanding home culture comes with parent engagement in the school." Absolutely. However, the teachers and schools must be welcoming of parents and want to engage with them. Thank you so much for bringing this up, Tawana. And what I'm going to encourage you as parents to do is to understand that teachers work for you. It is not the other way around. Your tax dollars, and let me tell you something right now, I'm getting ready to pay some hefty taxes that I don't appreciate. And I don't lose sight of the fact that it is my money that is paying your salary. My son, who's a really good, compliant kid, you say, "Don't touch this," he doesn't touch it. I mean, he was just one of those kids who never got in trouble in his life, at school or at home, has never been grounded or anything. Something happened at school, and the teachers called me, and it turned out, long story, but it was a misunderstanding. But before I got there, I was talking to the vice principal on the phone, and this guy had the nerve to tell me, we live in a predominantly white upper-class environment, and he said, "Mrs. Allen, your son can do well at our school if he follows the rules and applies himself." And I said, "Thank you for saying that, sir, and we'll talk about it when I get there." And one of the things I said to him, I said, "Do you remember when you told me that?" He goes, "Yes, and I believe it." I said, "Well, I need to tell you something, sir, that this is not your school. This is my son's school. You only work here, and we're not sure how long that will be. But my son was born into the school district. We've paid taxes into the school district, and he's not a guest nor a visitor. This is his school. And just as Tawana said, I made myself visible. It was at the point they knew me by first name. I think by the time I would come, they would call, Dr. Allen's in the house, be aware. But I wasn't a troublemaker, but I did let people know that this is my child's school and you work for us. And it's your job to educate him on the best possible way that he can learn. So there's a culture that can be created. So what's the background that we bring with us? In all situations, we bring our beliefs and our perceptions. I talked to you a bit about what my beliefs and perceptions are. We bring our personal identities, and we bring our cultural practices. So let's take another look. Let's look at Mateo, this little guy. Let's see what he's going to bring into the school environment.
Listen to me. Like I do this all the time. And if I go out at the house or to the door, that has his toy, and then that has all his toys.
Okay, but I have to yell at you guys.
Listen.
Okay, what?
Like everything they do at this house, you can't touch everything at Grandma's house.
Okay.
Okay, then what?
Then you're not listening to me.
Then you're not listening to me.
I asked you not to do something.
No, but listen to me. Because if we do something, if you get that first thing off, you're gonna break it.
Okay, but I'm letting you know that you cannot. No, you're not listening to me. Listen to me now. Listen to me now. No, you're not listening. I said no cupcakes. And you try to get cupcakes and you try to ask Grandma.
Again, this is one of my favorites. I just love Mateo. And in his family, he gets to call his mother by her first name. He gets to call her Linda. And he gets to interrupt her. And he gets to make his point. And he understands that he's at Grandma's house. And he gets to do what he wants to at Grandma's house. So when he enters school, what's going to happen to him? What's going to happen to Mateo if his parents are not engaged? If his parents don't share what their expectations are of him? Again, we have to be engaged, and I'm afraid that Mateo will be at high risk. This wonderful, feisty, self-assured young man is going to be at high risk for being one of those statistics that I talked to you about. When we talk about culture, and I adapted this from the iceberg theory of culture, because an iceberg to me seems very cold, and I wanted something a little warmer, so I put it at the tree. And when you look at the branch and the leaves, I live here in Colorado, and we go through all 4 seasons. And one of the things that I learned coming from California about trees is that trees change colors, and leaves die, and they fall off, and then they're renewed. And I say that because culture is not static. It can change. Some people have parents who weren't raised in this country, so they actually have a different culture from their family, and they create a new culture. And then you get older, and cultures change. But when we look at leaves, what do we see? We see the way that people dress. We hear music, and we know food. And these are the things that most people are very, very comfortable talking about. When we talk about culture in this country, we like to keep it at a very superficial level. And then there are things that happen at the roots, right in here where roots run deep. And these are things that are very rarely talked about, that are not always seen and rarely discussed. And they're the habits and assumptions of people, our understandings, our values, our judgments, our nature of friendships. Friendships are cultural. My mother's best friends were my aunties. My dad's best friends were my uncles. and their children were my cousins. And those cousins and aunties and uncles were just as real to me as those related to me by blood. The tone of voice. Again, sometimes this can be cultural. In my family, I never heard yelling. When you were in trouble, my dad's voice dropped an octave or two. He'd look at you and say, how many more times am I going to have to tell you? And I'd look like, no more, I got it, I'm done. And in some families, there's lots of yelling and screaming, but it doesn't mean that people are in trouble or that it's violent. But we don't talk about our tone of voice, our attitudes towards elders. There are some people who would never think about putting their family in a nursing home. And there are some who are already saved up for that, or who have long-term care because they feel that they don't want their children to take care of them. Our attitude towards elders, there are some customs, some cultures that highly respect their elders as the voice of wisdom and worthy of respect. And there are some that think, well, maybe they're older and they're out of touch. And then our concept of cleanliness. Oh my goodness, we don't talk about this, but it impacts us. I mean, some of us, I remember teaching my daughter how to clean a bathroom, and then I opened the drawers and I taught her how to clean the dust off the track on the inside of the drawers, and she looked at me like I was crazy. And then I realized, oh my goodness, I am my mother's child. Some people have house cleaners, some don't. Some people say, I'd rather spend time with my children than worry about the dirty dishes in the sink. The concept of cleanliness is cultural, but we rarely talk about that. And then we rarely talk about patterns of group decision-making. I love Mateo. He said, we can do whatever we want at Grandma's house. When I worked in a primarily Mexican environment, I learned very quickly that Abuelita had the last word. Grandma truly ruled in that environment. And then our preference for competition or cooperation. I worked for the state, and after the earthquake in Haiti, we went to pick up the children who were being adopted here in Colorado, and we had little goodie bags for each child. And every time we gave a child a bag, they would share it with everyone else. And we could not help them to understand the concept that you have your own, because they were so accustomed to cooperating and sharing, they didn't even have that as a concept. And then how we solve problems. Some of the things that are at the trunk are things like concepts of time. Now, there's whole groups of people who are not guided by a time clock. Time starts when I get there. But sometimes we look at that as a deficit and say they're always late. The concept of personal space. The concept of how we conduct ourselves. Our facial expressions. Our nonverbal communication. So when we look at culture, these are the things that we have to help people to understand. I mean, some of you were raised in a family where your parents would give you a look and you knew to stop. My daughter didn't get the look. I give her a look and she'd say, Mommy, why are you looking at me like that? Facial expressions. The whole concept of time is huge, but as parents, if we want the teachers to understand who we are and who our families are, we have to be willing to share our culture, but just like Tawana pointed out, the teachers and the schools have to be willing to hear it. And we have a responsibility to hold people accountable who are charged with the education and care of our children, because they are not trash and they are not to be thrown away. And when we suspend children, when they're asked to leave a program, it's paramount to saying you don't matter and we're throwing you away. And we have to stop this. And we have to come up with ways to truly address this issue so that we can keep our children in school, which is their right as American citizens, and to keep them there and to make sure they're treated well while they're there, and that teachers have the tools they need to address whatever behaviors might crop up in their classrooms. So thank you very, very much for your time and your attention at this webinar. And we have a few minutes to answer some questions. I did see one earlier from someone about what type of anti-bias training is effective. And Julie, I do a lot of this training all over the country, and we give teachers the tools that they need to reduce biases, but critical reflection. Dr. Devine, she has an article out about 7 strategies to use to reduce biases. But the greatest thing that we can do is to help to get to know one another, because nothing beats a great, authentic relationship. And one thing I do want to say to you all as parents, some of you may have had instances at school where teachers are giving you difficult or negative information about your child. I'm going to challenge you that when you are meeting with teachers, that you tell them at all times what's good, best, right, and amazing about your child, and never, ever, ever ask a teacher to give you negative information about your children. So let me show you what I'm talking about. Some of us know our children are busy and active and spirited, and unknowingly we go to school and we ask the teacher for negative information. I've heard parents say, what did my child do today? Did they get in trouble today? They say things like this, and when we ask those questions, we're setting that teacher up to look for negative behavior. So when you go to school, ask the teacher, tell me something wonderful my kid did today. And when you do that every day, that teacher's going to start looking for wonderful things to tell you. And you change their behavior by shifting their focus to the positives about your child rather than the negatives. So what other questions do we have in the last 4 minutes? Thank you, Judy. Thank you. I love the tree, too. No questions?
Well, it seems as if everyone was really engaged and chatting amongst. Oh, we have one for Tashia coming back.
Okay. So what recommendations do we have for bridging this gap between working parents and teachers? And I think communication is going to be key. And all of us who are working, we text from time to time. So I think getting that teacher's phone number and the text and asking her to send you little bitty updates, or you sending updates. In the morning, say, Clarence had a great day last night, great night last night. He was really, really interested in the movie Black Panther. So you might notice that he's wearing his his dashiki to school today. Ask him about it. You see what I mean? Just those little bitty summaries of things that can help teach teachers how to interact with our children. And I think that will go a long way in bridging that gap. Well, thank you so much. I think Melvette's going to wrap us up now.
Well, thank you so much, Rosemarie. And actually, I'm going to let Patty Kekison and Donna Thompson-Bennett close us out. But I really want to thank you so much for a phenomenal webinar. This was so much like gold, like liquid gold. So we really appreciate you taking the time out to join us tonight and present the webinar. We're also going to post the webinar recording on our website at www.parentswholead.org. So now I'll turn it over to Patty Kekison and Donna Thompson-Bennett.
Melva, just one thing for those of you on the line. You can, I'm always posting about suspensions and expulsions in the latest news, so you can follow me at Rosemarie Allen 4 at Twitter or Rosemarie.Allen50 on Facebook. Thank you.
Rosemarie and everyone, good evening. This is Patty Kekison. I'm delighted to be able to join you all this evening. And Rosemarie, thank you for sharing so much of your knowledge, expertise, and that there's stories with your data. We so appreciate hearing all of that. Those of us involved in PLTI and FLTI know that we address difficult topics in our classes. We go places. We talk about race, culture, prejudice, customs, and And we have a hand gesture that says we take what's behind our head here and we bring it forward to examine it. So thank you, Rosemarie, for helping us to continue to do that as alumni and as others in community. We really appreciate your expertise and look forward to maybe even connecting in the future and singing your TED Talk that we can look at as well. Is Donna on the line and would like to add some words? Okay, maybe Donna can't be unmuted at this point, but we do thank you all for joining us. Thank you, those near and far. We're hoping that some of our colleagues in Brisbane, Queensland, Australia are also with us.
Patty?
Thanks. Yes.
Hi, this is Donna. I was unmuting my phone, so I was busy saying thank you.
Oh.
Marie and everyone who had joined us this evening. Can
Great.
You hear me okay?
Yes, great. Thanks, Donna.
So I wanted to say ditto to everything that you shared and loving the acknowledgement of your responses throughout when there were questions. I want to say a personal thank you because I felt like I was connecting with you culturally from our family lens. And it was just kind of like chuckles as you were unpacking the stories that are potentially with the bias that could be easily based on our individual cultural experiences that we lived. And so I so appreciated the mix of that because a lot of times when we're talking about the data, we're really just talking about the outcomes and the statistics that one mentioned.
It's a little hard to hear you, Donna.
Okay, I don't.
That's better.
Is that better?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Oftentimes we're talking just about data after it's occurred, the suspension has occurred. So it was really great for you to give information. People need to take into account even before they start making decisions on what should occur with a child. And so I really appreciated that we made the culture and narrative statistics along with us, as Patty said, pulling those things that are behind us in front of us to look at through our implicit bias. So I so appreciate this topic. It is a tough topic, but we're not afraid, as Patty said, of tough issues. But I also think because we address it, it's a tough topic that we actually can begin to change in a positive way. So thank you again, Rosemarie, and thank you everyone for joining.
Thank you. Thank you, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Well, until our next webinar then, right, Melvet?
Yes, indeed, and we'll keep you posted on that. Make sure that you, if you're not already, to like us on Facebook at National PLI. So you'll find us there, or you can just type in National Parent Leadership Institute. And we look forward to sharing time with you again. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Melba. Take care, everyone.
Thank you. Hello. Are you still there, Rosemarie? Everyone's clicking off.